June 1 was a very hectic day. After a morning of SAT subject test, I piled my things into the back of my mom's car and I was off for New York. After being stuck in traffic for hours, I had a lot of time to think. I was so afraid of what was to come in the next 24 hours. Having to shift my mind quickly for a track meet, I picked up my iPod to listen to some music. And just as I reached, my mom directed my attention to the airport that she would soon be dropping me off at. I slowly turned my head and my heart dropped right to my stomach. I didn't know what to expect in Africa. I imagined huts and villages right out of the movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy. A group of Africans in loincloths, perplexed by the idea of a Coke bottle. The next thing I remember, I was sitting on our broken plane on the tarmac thinking, I wouldn't return from the trip. To hear that a propeller on the plane was not working properly had to be the worst feeling on the world for a first-time flyer. Again, giving my mind 3 more hours to think about what was to come. My scrambled mind took me on a journey that ended in a 13-hour slumber. I awakened in Johannesburg. I thought that I never left New York. Besides the African flight attendants, I never would have thought I was in Africa. It didn't look different, and it looked much like New York. I slowly began to realize that the world is much bigger than the United States. Of course I know basic geography, that is 7 continents, but having 18 hours to build expectations, my mind ran back to my childhood favorite movie, The Lion King. But all my expectations were exceeded when I stepped foot on the South African ground. In South Africa, I learned that the world is much bigger than my own. And someday, I wish to make South Africa a small part of my own world.
After a 17-hour plane ride, we were ready to catch some fresh air, stretch our legs, and soak up the South African sun. Anything but load into another vehicle for a several-hour-long drive. But drive we did. The roads were unkempt and the driver was reckless. For some it was thrilling, for others it was a recipe for some serious motion sickness. When we pulled through the gates of Lalibela Game Reserve, we thought we'd finally arrived. Little did we know we still had a few miles of winding dirt path to go, lined on both sides by antelope, hippos, and giraffes, all pausing to watch us pass as we worked our way up to camp. It was only a small taste of what we'd see over the course of the next week. That night, we embarked on our first game drive. The girls were introduced to our jolly guide and driver, Craig, and the boys placed with the spirited Sia. We grouped ourselves by gender for minimal spreading of cooties, with the exception of Patrick and David, who braved the exposure. The first thing that was abundantly clear was our unfortunate misunderstanding of geography. It was winter in South Africa, and the whipping wind was unforgiving. We dressed warmly as we could, and wound up wearing essentially all the clothing we brought, every day. Hunkered under 2 blankets each, we barely survived. Now, if I took the time to detail in full all we saw on the game drives, riveting though they were, I'm sure I'd lose your attention about a 10th of the way in. Instead, I'll try to quickly summarize. Over the next week, we left early in the morning to seek out elephants, giraffes, cheetahs, and various antelope. A lot of antelope. Our guides kindly pointed out and taught us to distinguish between the impalas, red hartebeests, and other frolicking herds on the plains. We met Timon, Pumbaa, and all their brethren, and watched elephants, hippos, and giraffes from that time was only a few yards away. Then, in one of the most exciting drives of all, we tracked down the mother lion and her cubs, and eventually one evening, the so-called king of the jungle himself. Other excursions included herding rhinos back into the bush to protect them from poachers, offering assistance in constructing a breeding enclosure for an endangered species of cats, and helping to irrigate the roads to prevent flooding in the plains. It was incredible to see the grueling work all our guides put into protecting the animals in their natural habitat. The environment they created was a completely wild, natural ecosystem. They never intervened in the process of natural selection. Predators were free to hunt, and only the strong survived, and we saw it all unfold before our eyes. and in our downtime played the most rousing hands of cards. To quote Macklemore, we danced, tribal dances, and we cried, mostly from exposure to the wind, and we laughed, and had a really, really, really good time. Our adventures at Lalibela extend far beyond those I've listed, but all in all, the non-stop action set the tone for what turned out to be both a highly eventful and transformative trip.
As we bumped into the township just outside of Cape Town, I was stunned by how quickly the landscape had changed. Big, beautiful houses nestled on the side of mountains on a paved road suddenly gave way to a dirt road that had been eroded by rain runoff and led into the township of Inazawa, located in the Haupt Bay area. The community is made up of densely situated tin houses, most of which have a maximum of 3 rooms, and some lack electricity or running water. It was in this township that we met with a girl named Nadiba Breakfast. She has just recently graduated college and returned to Inazawa to give back to her community. Nadiba was our insider to the history of the township, and she introduced us to the people. Being one of very few people to make it out of the township and be successful, Nadiba is seen as a role model and leader in the community, especially for women and girls. With Nadiba, we also attended a church service on National Youth Day, a South African holiday that commemorates the protests by black high school students in the township of Soweto on June 16, 1976, against a law mandating the teaching of Afrikaans in schools. In the township, we helped rebuild the roof on the house of Nandipa's brother, a recovering drug addict, helped play with and take care of the children in a local daycare, and helped tutor and gave supplies to a nearby high school. My experience in the daycare was one of the most memorable on the trip, as it was one of the most personal experiences I had with children. During one of our days at the daycare, we helped the women running it by taking the kids down to a playground with swing slides and a paved ground for soccer and volleyball, so they could get out of the small 3-room building. The pure happiness that young boys and girls showed while chasing a soccer ball or trying to tackle me was a powerful learning experience for me, as it made me appreciate what I have and reminded me how highly I should value my friends and being able to make a good time out of any situation. I was reminded as the children pulled me toward the swings to push them, or stole my hat so they could have an extra bite for lunch, that children are all the same, no matter where they are from. Although we did not speak Xhosa, and they did not yet speak English, these little guys were just interested in having a good time as kindergartners, that some of us mentor at nearby elementary schools are. Thanks to the help of Nandiba and Mrs. Hyde, I was able to learn from and spend time with these awesome little guys in the township just outside of Cape Town, enriching my experience in South Africa. So I thank Mrs. Hyde for giving me the opportunity to learn from these experiences in Inazawa too.
Picture it. 12 teenagers packed into a medium-sized van for hours on end. Although this may not seem like the recipe for a great time, the places that we went in this van made every cramped moment worth it. The tours we went on South Africa could be described most simply as fantastic. Our tours ranged from exploring massive caves to a brief excursion where we got to see wild penguins in their natural habitat. Although each tour was unique and wonderful, one particularly stood out to me. This was our tour of the Cape of Good Hope, the southernmost point of Africa. It was on one of our last days of the trip, and once again the gang packed up into a medium-sized van and bumped along for about an hour and a half towards our destination. We hiked up a steep path for about 30 minutes till we got to the top of the bluff where we could look out and see the vast ocean in front of us. Although there were many other tourists around us at the top of the mountain, it was oddly quiet, as if everyone was too lost in the beauty of the place to even speak. It could be described as a transcendent moment where every person shared in the same silent awe of the dark, beautiful ocean, the craggy gray bluffs, and the firm African air that beat against us. There was something about knowing that you were on the edge of the massive continent of Africa that made this moment oddly spiritual. Standing there, staring out at the ocean, I began to think about the name of this place, the Cape of Good Hope. Up at the top of the bluff, at what felt like the edge of the world, this name suddenly felt incredibly fitting, for the beauty alone is enough to instill a quiet hope in anyone.
greatest experience during the trip to South Africa at the beginning of the summer, for me, was swimming with the great white sharks. We rode out on a small tour boat about 5 miles off the coast of Cape Town. We were each thrown a very smelly and questionably moist wetsuit and other diving gear. We struggled to put them on in the constantly rocking boat, especially Kieran and Patrick as they danced around in their underwear. When we stopped the boat, the tour guides threw in a large fish net to attract the sharks. Next thing we know, we are jumping into the cold, uninviting, shark-infested waters. There was a cage in the water that we were able to hide in. However, we still felt as if we were swimming in the open with the sharks. Next to me in the small crowded metal cage was Bo, Emily, Will, and Brian. In those very long 15 minutes, we became very close emotionally as we feared for our lives. We would try to keep our heads above the water in order to breathe and listen to the captain as to what direction the sharks were coming from. There were about 20 different sharks that swam towards our cage. It was amazing how the sharks would not even react to the fact that we were there. The sharks would come so close to the cage I could stick my hand out and touch them. Of course, that was against the rules, so instead, I just observed behind the bars. As awesome as watching Shark Week from the comfort of my couch is, watching from the cage was far more thrilling. I had an amazing experience during my stay in South Africa this summer, and I thank Miss Hyde for everything she did for us. I strongly encourage everyone to join Miss Hyde for her next South African adventure.
These experiences we've described tonight are all incredible. Okay. These experiences we have described tonight are all incredible and all transformational. We stood in many places, saw many things.
Will. Just back up like 6 inches. Back up a little bit.
Okay. These experiences we've described tonight are all incredible and all transformational. We stood in many places, saw many things, and experienced both the amazing and the disheartening. In Lalibela we saw the old, the part of the country that its people were so desperately trying to preserve. In the townships we saw the new, the thriving new, and the new striving to stay afloat, striving to function, and met the people that were helping it to. We saw a fantastic country that, like many others, had both beauty and disorder. And we not only saw, but helped. We contributed to an effort to protect and to aid this country. One of my favorite memories of this trip was during an anti-poaching surveillance drive. Here it is. I took a breath. The air was cold and clean. The darkness was refreshing as the jet lag flowed through me, clouding my mind. As the place around me faded into a focused reality, I sat there quietly as the engine of the vehicle droned, and the bumps of the ground below rocked us gently. We swayed in our seats, wrapped in old wool blankets, our eyes searching the vast wilderness and the ancient pureness that it encompassed. The sky, untainted by synthetic light above us, gleamed. We happened upon a lioness and her 2 adolescent children with great excitement, unintentionally interrupting their game. They glared at us unsuspecting. It felt good, so good to blend into a place so untamed, so pure, to be accepted into a place we have been distancing ourselves from since the beginning of time, the place we refer to as the wild. We left them to their business and carried on, soon discovering a family of rhinos. We herded these fantastic animals back into the safety of the wood, just catching glimpses of them through the headlights, so strong, so capable. When we returned to camp, I felt disappointed that all this was necessary to protect these incredible creatures. But then remembered how fantastic the effort was that these people were making to protect their country and its animals, or as they called them quite surely, their brothers. This was the Africa we remembered from our childhood, from our ignorance once warranted by age. This Africa was not a lie, but it is a piece of the old Africa, the Africa that is threatened. Although we were in South Africa, one of the more developed and stable countries of the African continent, the struggle to protect what remains and to balance what is new was still very much apparent. In the townships, we stepped out of the vehicles, greeted by dust and dirt carried by the wind. Rap music from all directions clashed into an underlying racket. The houses stacked like crates, all made of sheet metal and salvaged things. Filthy dogs roamed the paths, neglected and forlorn. People stared at us with eyes of wonder and curiosity, never leaving, looking for explanation in our backs and on our faces. When in the township, we met a 19-year-old woman, Nandipa. Her house no bigger than a small dorm room in a township ironically placed in the valley between two mountains. Beautiful suburbs atop these mountains, just in sight, but not in reach. Nandipa said that she was proud of where she comes from, that she does not look for pity. This is why she gives back. Nandipa contributes to Project Hope, as well as working a job, as well as running the community center in the township, as well as searching for sponsorship so that she can go to university, as well as tending to her brother who at the time was recovering from a drug addiction, quite common in the townships, as well as seeking prospective work in the US. All of this Nandipa is responsible for at age 19. This was shocking. This by definition, I believe for all of us, was a wake-up call. I still think about this when I'm complaining about how overwhelming something is, or how much work I have. We had so many fantastic times on the South Africa trip. Some funny, some serious. We not only enjoyed this trip, but we were changed by it. We saw parts of a country so vibrant, so pure, and others infected by poverty. We met the people who are making a difference, and realized the effect an individual can have, whether it be on a nation or a township. I'm confident that we will never forget South Africa.